I would like to turn the time over to Darrell Castle for just a moment. Curtis Caine has been a lifetime member of the party since its inception, and he passed away in January. And Darrell is just going to give a tribute to his life and his service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked Joan to come up with me so she could help me through this a little bit. She's made out of tougher stuff than I am sometimes, not always, but sometimes. But Dr. Caine, that's the picture you see on your table there in front of you. We couldn't let his death go by without at least doing something. And Dr. Caine died January 1st of this year. Actually, his daughter said after having a massive bowl of black-eyed peas and hog jowls, that's traditional down in Tennessee for New Year's, and after addressing Christmas cards, in fact, we got a Christmas card from him after he was dead. So he was still working up to the end of his life. That's the point. He was 97 years old. I wrote a eulogy for him, which I'm not going to read because that would just be too much. But Dr. Caine was a dear friend of Joan and me and many people in this group. I know Jim Clymer, many others were very close to him. He served the party as parliamentarian forever. I mean, he was parliamentarian until he was just too physically infirm to do it any longer. But let me just tell you some things about Dr. Caine that you might not know. Number one, he was active in the conservative movement many years before this party was ever formed. In fact, back during the 70s and Howard Phillips' moral majority and conservative caucus days, Howard endeavored to speak in all 435 congressional districts. And Dr. Caine was a private pilot, and he flew him around from place to place in his airplane. But Dr. Caine was born in New Orleans in 1921. He married his wife, Evelyn, who he called Lynn, when he was 17 years old. And he was married for 69 years. So he was a naval officer during World War II, but he went to Tulane Medical School, was a doctor. He was in the medical corps and in the Navy. And in Vietnam, he volunteered to go into hostile territory, let's say, and treat wounded and injured people and sick people and so forth. So he did a lot of different things, but he was one of our original members. He was a great wordsmith. That's how he became our parliamentarian. You could ask him any question about the Constitution or about Robert's Rules that you wanted to ask him. He could always answer it. And he was always quick to point out to you that there were flaws in your analysis and so forth. And I remember telling him one time, well, Dr. Caine, he insisted that I just call him Curtis and not give him the honorary title. But I said, Dr. Caine, that's sometimes I get tired. I think about maybe letting go of all this. And he said, well, why? Because he just couldn't imagine not working until the day of your death, So he was an encourager in that regard. Joan and I attended his funeral at the First Baptist Church of Jackson, Mississippi, January 5th. An old and wonderful church. Some of you have even been in it, but it's a huge downtown church that's been there for many, many years, but it hasn't been updated or rebuilt. It's an original. But those people, his family and the people that his service that we were there, we talked to, they didn't know everything about this man. They saw his service with us, his long-term service with the John Birch Society, other people like that, as kind of interesting and eccentric, I guess you could say. He was a member of certain patriotic groups. That's what they said in his little funeral thing. He was a member of certain patriotic groups. But he was a lot more than that to us. So I am very proud and happy to be allowed to honor him, to say those things about him. You know, he's one of the he's just one of the people who was originally part of that intellectual brain trust, I guess you could say, that really built this party. So I'm going to let Joan here say a few words to you, and then that will close out our presentation.
Well, I want to tell you about the woman behind the man. Her name was Evelyn, but she went by Lynn. And she was a few months older than Curtis, but I think she kind of badly influenced him at the time because they kind of got married really early and against people's will and stuff. He was an adventurer, and there's a book that was written in Mississippi, where he was from. And, well, he was from New Orleans, but they lived in Jackson, Mississippi. And
I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you that Curtis was the first anesthesiologist in the state of Mississippi. And he told me that he delivered over 4,000 babies. He provided the anesthesiology for over 4,000 babies, and never had a single one where it was necessary to kill the baby to save the mother. But he also told me that for the first 10 years of his anesthesiology practice, he charged $5 to deliver a baby. And when he went up to 10, several of his patients left and went somewhere else because it was too much.
well, they got married, and I'm not going to tell you their history, but I'm going to tell you that when she was in her later years, she was at least 70, she went blind in one eye. And just a little bit later, in the other eye. And so she went to a school to learn how to get around, and there were times when Curtis would come to the meetings and she'd be at home, and she was able to do what she needed to do. She was a remarkable woman. And Bob Pittman wrote a book. It's called When God Said No, and it's about the Lynn Caine story. And it is a book that I want to tell you is not about Lynn alone, because there was never really a Lynn. You know, at 17, there was always a Lynn and Curtis. There are pictures in here that you would love to see of Curtis and Lynn at 17, at their 50th anniversary, when he was in the service. I mean, pictures that, for those who knew him at all, you look at it and you just kind of smile and almost snicker, because it's like, Curtis was like that once. But here's the thing. I was fortunate enough to get some of the books, and so I'm going to give away one. Also in it is a copy of for those who might care, and if the person doesn't want it that wins this, then you can give it to someone who does. But there's also a copy of the funeral service thing. But anyway, it's When God Said No, and you have on the back of your name tag a number. That's what that was for. And we are going to pick a number, and whoever gets this, I just ask you this: if you don't think you're going to be interested, please give it to someone who is. It is just too precious, and there are too many people who would really enjoy it. I think it's going to be quite an honor to get it.
Hey, John,
Yes?
are some of those books back on the table?
No.
It's the only copy up there.
Only copy makes it really valuable. You can get it on Amazon.
Okay.
You want me to read it?
Read it. What's the number?
Number is 14.
Number 14. Tom, somebody that will definitely appreciate it.
I definitely want it. Thank you.
So wait to turn this off.
Let me say a couple words about Curtis, since I wanted their book. I think some of y'all might remember that every once in a while we would take a few excursions at some of our national committee meetings and stuff, but a lot of times Curtis and I would come a bit early, and like once when we had it up somewhere up in the Northeast, New Hampshire or somewhere up that way, he and I went and saw an old submarine that they had. I mean, it was small. It was just a small capsule type thing, and he really got a kick out of that. And so anyway, I did spend some really good times with Curtis, and there was a time there when we had it up in Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, and that's only been, what, was that about 2015, I think? So it wasn't that long ago. 2010 was when it was? Okay. I guess it was longer than I thought. But anyway, yeah, 2010. Well, there were storms and things like that, and he and I wound up being there in the Denver airport, and the plane got canceled, so we couldn't go, but I helped him get around that Denver airport and get his stuff, you know, his ticket to back home and all that sort of thing. But he was a remarkable man. He always talked about his wife Lynn, and he was very good at keeping us in line. He would chastise the executive committee for this or that, and he was just a wonderful person. So I really appreciate the book. Thank you all very much.
That's appropriate that Tom should win that because he's worked very closely.